This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Call this meeting to order. It's meeting number 154 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Yes, I'll get you in 2 seconds, Mr. Brock.
Before we continue with question period, I'd just like to point out to members that the chair was generous with many members from all parties today who had gone over their 60 seconds. Just so that we could start on time, I'm going to ask all members to be mindful to try to get their declarations within 60 seconds so we can start right away. The honourable member from Kamloops, Caribou Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, violent criminals first, victims second. That is the Prime Minister's motto. Sexual psychopaths like Paul Bernardo and Terry Lynn McClintock get to play tennis and live comfortably in lower security while victims serve psychological life sentences. This happened because of Bill C-83, the Prime Minister saying that everybody in jail should be at the lowest security possible. This begs the question, why does the Prime Minister prefer criminals over victims?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our colleague knows very well that's not the case. He knows that all members of this House should properly be concerned about victims of crime. I think all members of this House should also be judicious to continually repeat the names of Canada's most heinous criminals in this House. We think on this side, Mr. Speaker, that's also disrespectful for victims. These heinous criminals remain in federal prisons where they belong, and our government will always stand up for victims, including not repeating the names of heinous criminals over and over again in this House.
And I ask the honourable member from Lakelands, please, to not participate unless they're recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
I'll say a name, Tori Stafford. One of her relatives wrote to me about what that minister just said yesterday. He said something similarly insensitive. And if he were to read the note I got, I think he'd be on his feet withdrawing. Mr. Speaker, these NDP Liberals want to give a temporary tax trick while permanently raising the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Here's the choice. The NDP Liberals want to remove the GST on a few things. Conservatives want to axe the carbon tax on everything permanently. Will this Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so we can axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Speaker, today is a tremendous day in the House of Commons. Why? Because we're giving a tax break to Canadians so they can buy essential things. Groceries, snacks, kids' clothing, kids' boots, diapers, all tax-free. That means starting on December 14th, buying beer or wine to enjoy with your friends or family, going to a restaurant, grabbing some takeout, all tax-free for the holidays. The best question that Conservative member can ask his leader is whether this time he'll be unmuzzled and unleashed to actually vote for an affordability measure in this chamber.
The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, this is nothing more than the arsonist pouring more inflationary fuel on the fire. Just this last May, the Prime Minister said this: you send out more cash, quote, inflation goes up by exactly that amount, end quote. Here's our common sense solution: axe the tax for everyone. Forever. Cheaper gas, groceries, home heating, and everything that's shipped. Now that's a Christmas present everybody wants. So will the NDP Liberals call an election so we can axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I'm delighted to hear the member opposite talking about Christmas, because that's what we should be talking about, having a festive season. His leader, unfortunately, was talking about trickery. I thought he was still stuck in Halloween mode. But here we are talking about the festive season and what we're going to do to make it better for Canadians. We're going to ensure that the toys they buy their children are GST-free. We're going to ensure the Christmas tree they put up in their home to gather around is also tax-free. That's something that I would think every member of this chamber should get behind. But yet, to date, just to this point, we have no idea whether the Conservatives will actually support an affordability measure that helps Canadians for Christmas. Will they?
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberals are trying to hide from Canadians that the company owned by the disgraced Liberal from Edmonton Centre is still eligible to get government contracts. Now, the Prime Minister may believe that his former and failed employment minister is the victim, but the real victims, of course, are Indigenous people and the people defrauded by his company. So to this point, the Prime Minister has failed to ban global health imports from bidding on contracts with the Government of Canada. Will he stand up and ban them today?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been very clear in this House that that company was not on the list, and Indigenous procurement is for Indigenous people. But, Mr. Speaker, this is an attempt by the Conservative members of Parliament to distract from what is really good news for Canadians today. And the fact that we are going to give a break on GST for essential goods over the coming months, and we are going to support 18.6 million Canadians with a Canada Working benefit. Mr. Speaker, the question remains, will the Leader of the Opposition allow Conservative MPs to vote for it?
Exactement.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
So let's get this straight. The disgraced former minister, the member for Edmonton Centre, a Liberal, started a pandemic profiteering business, and that business lied about being Indigenous to get government contracts. They're under investigation by the Edmonton Police Service for fraud, and this Liberal government is still allowing them to bid on government contracts. Now, they're saying they're not on the list for approved Indigenous-owned businesses. But what about for any other type of contract? Why is this Prime Minister determined to protect Liberal insiders, and why won't he ban his disgraced former minister from having these contracts?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, that company is not on the list for Indigenous procurement. But yet again, Mr. Speaker, what we see from the Conservatives opposite is they don't want to talk about the important affordability measures that we have presented today. They don't want to talk about the fact that they are going to vote against and oppose a GST break for millions of Canadians when it comes to essential goods. They don't want to talk about the fact that they are going to oppose a $250 benefit for working Canadians, Mr. Speaker. They're just not there for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, this government says that they support women's equality and reconciliation, but their actions show anything but. This Prime Minister was very quick to fire the first female Indigenous Minister of Justice because she wasn't willing to lie for him. Yet it took him weeks to fire a Minister of Employment, a white male, who faked his Indigenous identity. So why was it so easy to fire one but not the other?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, what's so encouraging, and I would say it's not often that I find something encouraging from the Conservative Party, but what is encouraging to hear is their staunch support for Indigenous procurement. And I agree with the Conservative Party. We have to work hard to make sure that Indigenous businesses are the ones that actually profit from Indigenous priorities. And so I want to thank the Conservative Party for keeping their eye on making sure that this country ensures Indigenous economic success. We'll do that together.
The Honourable Member from Calgary. To err is human. The Honourable Minister from The Honourable Member from Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, this is not real reconciliation. It took weeks for this Prime Minister to fire the Minister of Employment, to allow him to resign. Real reconciliation, according to the former Minister of Justice, would have been to fire that Minister of Employment immediately. She says she's left to watch white people play Ancestry Wheel of Fortune. She says it's shameful and it's destructive. So why did it take the Prime Minister so long to fire the Minister of Employment when it was so easy to fire a real female Indigenous minister?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous...
Great, Mr. Speaker, to see so many questions on Indigenous priorities in this House, and I want to thank the member opposite and hope that she will work with her party to ensure the safe passage of Bill C-61, a Clean Drinking Water Act for First Nations has been co-developed with First Nations in this country. Mr. Speaker, there are many opportunities that the party opposite can support Indigenous priorities, and that's certainly one of them.
Order. The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Hide your wallets. This Liberal NDP Costly Coalition is back to break the bank. After doubling housing costs, doubling the national debt, and doubling food bank usage, they want to quadruple the carbon tax scam. The leader of the NDP is too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to Liberal interests to fight for the people. That's why he's willing to keep this corrupt Liberal government in power, because he has pension tension. Why not give Canadians real relief? Call a carbon tax election now, so common sense Conservatives can axe the tax for good.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is giving a tax break to all Canadians. That means that there's not going to be GST, Mr. Speaker, on essential goods, on everyday goods, Mr. Speaker, like groceries, like toys for the holidays, like kids' clothing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians are looking forward to this tax break. We know that it is done responsibly. It'll be done for 2 months, Mr. Speaker. The question on everybody's mind is that Conservative member checked with his leader to see if he'll be able to vote for a tax break, or maybe the leader won't let him do that.
No holds barred.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Instead of a temporary inflationary pause, why don't we give Canadians a real break? Call a carbon tax election now, so Canadians can send this costly coalition on a permanent holiday. Because a common sense Conservative government will axe the tax on gas, groceries, and home heating and bring home lower prices and powerful paychecks. Let's do it. Let's call a carbon tax election, so common sense Conservatives can axe the tax on everything for everyone for good.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, this week the media reported that the Conservative leader is preventing the members of Parliament from the Conservative Party of advocating for their citizens, of advocating for housing investments, Mr. Speaker. Well, this Liberal government is there for Canadians. We are instituting a tax holiday, Mr. Speaker, a tax break for Canadians when they need it most. The question on everybody's mind is, are Conservative members going to be allowed to represent their communities, allowed to represent vulnerable Canadians, and vote in favour of a tax break, or are they going to need to follow their Conservative leader?
And ask members again to not take the floor when they're not recognized. And I've asked a member from South Shore St. Margaret's on several occasions this week, and I'm also asked a member from Calgary Signal Hill, please, not to take the floor. We all want to hear the question that is coming from the Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peter. Excuse me, I'm going to ask ministers, please, to keep colleagues. The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, Canadians don't have to wonder anymore. The cost of living crisis coalition, well, they never really left us. Just a few months ago, though, it was the NDP leader who said these Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. I couldn't agree more, Mr. Speaker. But today, he flip-flopped. He announced his full confidence in this Liberal Prime Minister. If this coalition is so sure of themselves, their poverty-inducing agenda, why not go ahead, go to Canadians, and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Let me get this straight. The Conservative members of Parliament talk about reducing poverty and talk about helping Canadians through affordability challenges, but when we have a real thing on the table that's going to cut the GST on essential goods, they have to listen to their leader and oppose cutting taxes for Canadians. But, Mr. Speaker, this is just par for the course for the Conservatives. We know that the supposed guy that fights for freedom of speech doesn't want his MPs to speak freely. The real question is will he allow them to freely vote for Canadians and this tax cut? Thank you.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, how can Canadians be reasonably expected to see that a costly coalition that got us into this economic quagmire could possibly see the way out? This Prime Minister has increased food costs by 35%. He's increased the cost of gasoline by over 50%. He's increased the cost of mortgage and housing by over 70%. Simple question, when will this Prime Minister allow for real chance, real opportunity, real hope by calling a carbon tax election?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
A GST being removed on essential goods for the next couple of months, and the Conservatives want to vote against that. As we go into the holidays and families are thinking about buying toys and getting Christmas trees, and we are offering a GST removal on those very things, the Conservatives say, no, don't stand up for Canadians, don't help them through these tough times. Mr. Speaker, that's just par for the course and a pattern of behaviour. And when you look in the dictionary, it actually starts with an H and ends with an hypocrisy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The NDP leader said the Liberals were too weak, too selfish, too beholden to corporate interest to fight for Canadians. But it only took him 2 months to renege on his word, reaffirm his commitment to the Prime Minister and his costly coalition, and keep Canadians in carbon tax hell. Today he reaffirmed that he is committed and showed his confidence in this Prime Minister in quadrupling the carbon tax on farmers, on food and fuel. How about a common sense solution? Axe the carbon tax on everything, for everyone, forever. Will the Prime Minister believe Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, we are delivering real relief for Canadians, and it is the Conservatives who are trying to now make life more expensive when they have an opportunity to help Canadians with the high cost of living. But this is unsurprising, Mr. Speaker, because it's from the same party whose leader was delivering donuts to people out here who were protesting, and yet this morning had protesters removed by police from his home, Mr. Speaker. The guy who cares about freedom of speech certainly doesn't like it when people oppose his views. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, it's not good when protesters go to anyone's house, not just the leader of the opposition.
going to ask the honourable member from Foothills to start again. The honourable member.
At a time when 2 million Canadians are forced to a food bank in a single month, when food inflation in Canada is 36% higher than it is in the United States, and a quarter of Canadians are going, 25% of children are going to school hungry, the House Leader of the Liberal government is making this a partisan thing about protesters at the Leader's house, when they should be disgusted that protesters are going to any house of any member of Parliament. I would hope she'll stand up and apologize for those comments.
Colleagues, the Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I'm actually really glad to hear that from my honourable colleague, because no protester should be in front of anyone's house, except when the convoy was here, they cheered them on in front of so many residents in Ottawa.
Exactly,
and
in my residence.
They cheered on
my residence.
who prevented them from going to the hospital, who prevented them from going to the grocery store, who prevented them from ambulances arriving at their homes. Mr. Speaker, there is a double standard on that side of the House, and we cannot stand for that.
See you later.
Full member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, despite the foolishness that's been going on, there's a crisis that exists in Canada.
That's not nice.
Member from St. Albert, Edmonton, please control himself in this place or take himself outside of this room. I'm going to invite the honourable member from Cumberland. Come, everyone, relax. The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester will start again.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Despite the messy split in September, it looks like Canada's NDP Liberal woke power couple has gotten back together again. And they're coming for Canadian hard-earned money. Canadians are not fooled by their temporary tax trickery. 53% more Nova Scotians are using food banks than 5 years ago. Almost 40,000 Nova Scotians are visiting food banks every month, and 12,000 of them are children. Here's a better and common sense solution. Axe the carbon tax on everything, for everyone, forever. Cheaper gas, groceries, and home heating, and everything that's shipped. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if that member and any of the members of the Conservative Party of Canada actually cared about affordability for Canadians, they would support this measure to remove the GST on essential items that we are putting forward that is going to help Canadians over the coming months get through these challenging times. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a pattern of behaviour. They say one thing, they do another, whether that is with regards to supporting Canadians through affordability challenges, muzzling their members of Parliament who try to speak up on behalf of their constituents, or taking away, removing protesters by police that don't agree with them. Mr. Speaker, they are completely disrespectful to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Back to the fraud at CRA. Yesterday in committee, the minister went on the attack, but get this, not against fraudsters, against whistleblowers. It's crazy. She joined in CRA's witch hunt against its own employees. But without them, we would never have known taxpayers were robbed of over $100 million this year. Without them, we would have never known that CRA had hidden 30,000 cases of personal information theft from the Privacy Commissioner. Without them, we never would have known, because CRA was covering it all up. Why is the minister an accomplice in the attack on whistleblowers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker.
Must be denounced, and I have to say that our minister and our government has supported Bill C-290 from that party's private members bill. There are situations where we are not able to talk about issues, specifically with respect to Section 241 in the Income Tax Act, but there are obligations and there are ways in which we are able to have whistleblowers report what they need to within the CRA, and we are constantly working on these issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the disgraced Liberal MP from Edmonton Centre resigned from Cabinet, but as of today, his shady company GHI is still eligible to bid on government contracts, despite the member admitting that he lied about his heritage to get dollars earmarked for Indigenous businesses in the past. That's on top of being embroiled in conflicts of interest and even allegations of being connected with international drug busts. The government House Leader still has not made clear whether or not that company has been banned from bidding on contracts with the government. Can she give a straight answer here today?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is clear is that the company in question was not listed as an Indigenous company. What is clear is that the company never received a contract as an Indigenous company. And Mr. Speaker, we have taken many steps going forward to provide for modernization of procurement and transparency and openness, and we're working towards supporting Canadians and supporting the Indigenous community who require our support, and we'll be there for them all the way through. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, what do 5 Range Rovers, 2 Porsche Cayennes, a post office box co-owned by a suspected drug trafficker, a warehouse full of medical supplies destroyed by arson, millions of dollars in fraud, and a company falsely claiming to be Indigenous all have in common? The Liberal member for Edmonton Centre. Now, the Prime Minister continues to stand by his MP. He sees nothing wrong with these scandals. It begs the question, if all this corruption and scandal isn't enough to fire a minister, how corrupt do you need to be to get fired by this Prime Minister?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, that question has been answered. One question that I have is how far the Conservatives are going to go. Conservative leader wants to take away $10 a day childcare from Canadian mothers. He wants to take away dental care subsidies from our seniors. He wants to take away 750,000 new construction bills from Canadians who want to buy their first home, Mr. Speaker. Now the newest policy of the Conservative leader is to take away the tax break that the Liberal government announced today for all Canadians. When is it going to end, Mr. Speaker? Under this Conservative leader, he's going to make life more expensive.
The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, now that the Prime Minister's minister in charge of Jasper's recovery has resigned under a cloud of suspicion, who's going to oversee the rebuilding of this beautiful community? Will it be the radical Environment Minister, who ignored warnings for years from forestry experts that the dead forest around Jasper was a powder keg waiting to blow? Will the Prime Minister assure Canadians that he won't put the radical minister who failed the community by allowing it to burn in the first place in charge of Jasper and towns like it again?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
This member should be ashamed of the previous government's record in the protection of Jasper, Mr. Speaker. Do you know how much they invested in 2011 for fire protection in Jasper? Zero. Do you know how much they invested in 2012? Zero. Do you know how much they invested in 2013? Zero. 2014? Zero. 2015? Zero. We've invested more than $60 million in fire prevention in Jasper. They did absolutely nothing.